what is England like at this time? And equally, what is India like at this time?
Perhaps the best way to kind of set that scene is to just give a rough timeline. So if you think about the English monarchs that I've spoken about, there's Elizabeth I, and then when Elizabeth I dies in 1603, there's a brief kerfuffle about who's going to inherit the crown from her, and then it is James, who was James the Sixth of Scotland, becomes James the First of England. So there's that regime change. Shift lenses and think about the Indian subcontinent, and particularly kind of the northern Indian subcontinent. We have the Mughals. Elizabeth's direct contemporary is Akbar the Great, and he's a fascinating character. He is the third Mughal emperor and the first really stable one. The Mughals themselves are Mongols who come down from, if you think about the map of India, from the top and slowly spread their way down into the triangular bit of the South Asian kind of peninsula. So there's Akbar the Great. But the people I'm really interested in live around the time of James I in England and Akbar's son, Jahangir. So just to set the scene in terms of England, as I said, England at this period has been going through a fairly fraught period of separation from continental Europe. Henry VIII breaking away from the Catholic Church has been a part of it, but then there's also been ongoing tensions with Spain, which is the Spanish and Portuguese empires are huge in terms of power in continental Europe, and that skews the balance in power structures. England is feeling increasingly isolated in this period, and that isolation has enormous impact in terms of its culture and in terms of its economy. In terms of its culture, there's a deep sense among the English that they're slightly running behind times in terms of fashion and music and art and all of those things. So there's a little bit of a chip on the shoulder. In terms of trade, there's a significantly bigger anxiety because they're deeply aware, particularly English merchants are deeply aware, the Portuguese and the Spanish, and increasingly the Dutch, are essentially carving up European handle on world trade. And the English are really running behind. And that's partly because the English monarchy hasn't invested enough. So the English government, the state, hasn't given them the kind of monetary and economic and diplomatic support that the Spanish have with the Spanish Empire, for instance. So there's that problem. On the other hand, again, jump over the seas and you have the Mughal Empire, which at its peak stretches almost across the Indian subcontinent except the southern peninsular regions. That's roughly about 1.24 square miles and 150 million people, perhaps. And its monarch, Jahangir's annual revenue is about 54 million sterling at this moment, which is about 100 times more than the complete annual revenue of England. Not just the crown's revenue, but the complete annual kind of, income of England. So you can see there's a huge difference between the two. And that's partly, I think, what really fascinates me, that once, in a sense, what I'm trying to do with quoting India, which shifts between the Mughal kind of landscape and the English landscape, and to and fro's between the two, as you will have seen. And it is an exercise in shifting that lens a little bit. What happens if you shift that lens away from telling the story purely from an English perspective and think also about how these people, as the Mughals would have put it, the kula poshan, the sieve wearers on their heads, how these people would have appeared to the Mughal Empire, to the Mughal bureaucrats and tax officers and petty officers, as well as to the emperor himself. What would they have made of them?